Act 3. Millicent strains her eyes and shakes her head. It's too dark to see it. It might be land. My eyes are playing tricks on me.
We'd best wait until it's lighter and make our way towards it, Bennett said. Let's just hope that we make it until then.
Every minute that dragged by felt like an hour, and not a word passed between them. Hathor passed a water bottle around that they took small, careful sips from. Bennett focused his attention to the water to check for any movement below, but everything was calm, eerily calm and still. The moon cast its light all over the ocean, and save for the decimated ship, it was a beautiful, dark blue expanse that seemed to go on forever,
passing the boundaries of the horizon and beyond, making the remaining three seem even more desolate and alone.
The first strands of sunlight appeared several hours later, and Millicent awoke groggily from a deep sleep. She nudged Hathor. Bennett was still keeping watch. Now that you're both awake, let's make a start. See what that thing is. Bennett tossed a broken plank of wood over to each of them. Makeshift oars, he said. Millicent looked around at the floating debris of the ship and shook her head, words failing her. She plunged the oar into the water, but hit something solid. She peered over the side of the float and tried again. This time, something dislodged.
I think there's something under here, she said. Hathor and Bennett sprung to their feet with their oars held about their heads. The object rose to the surface, and a grey and lifeless head bulged out of the water. An expression of shock permanently sketched onto its face. Millicent turned around and gagged. Hathor and Bennett sighed in relief.
Come now, it's just a body, Hathor said as he repositioned himself on the left-hand side of the float. He's probably in a better position than we are. Come, let's see what that shape in the distance is.
Millicent steadied herself, and they set off away from the ruins of the ship. Bodies and smashed pieces of wood bobbed intermittently for half an hour, until they had finally gotten away from the proximity of its fate, and forward to their destination.
The object grew bigger as they approached it, but it was still difficult to make out what they were heading towards. It looked stationary and large, but too small to be land. I think it's a small island, Hathor said, but it looks too small to be of any use to us. And what do we do if it is land? Millicent said as she regained her breath.
Let's decide that once we've actually reached the thing, Bennett said as he pushed harder and harder with his oar.
A fog settles and the object is obscured from them. They continue forward until the mist departs and their makeshift raft stops. It's an overturned ship, said Bennett, and a big one at that. We could use the ship to continue to New York, said Millicent. That was the original destination for us, wasn't it? Aye, that it was. But an overturned ship isn't of much use, said Bennett.
Hathor looks at the huge hull and nods. Unless it's turned back over, then it would be more than adequate for us to set sail. Let's guide the raft to the back.
They rowed the raft to the ship's rear and they stopped at its rudder. Without hesitation, Hathor grabbed its rudder and began to heave the ship, rocking the raft. Millicent grabbed onto Bennett as they watched in awe as a huge mass of the overturned ship began to move. With a loud bellow, Hathor threw the ship onto its base, throwing everyone off of the raft. Bennett pulled Millicent out of the water and swam her towards the ship. Hathor followed behind them and they climbed up the side on various beams. It wasn't until they were on the deck that they noticed that Hathor was in pain. As he got onto the deck, he collapsed and grabbed his side. Hathor, Millicent said as she kneeled down. What's wrong? He took his hand away to reveal a large piece of wood lodged into his side. He howled in pain and she looked at Bennett. A large pool of blood formed around him, covering Millicent's legs until he finally passed out. He'll never make it, Bennett said as he looked around the ship for something to aid his pain. I've checked everywhere. There's some basic foodstuffs, but no opium, nothing. We can't just leave him here to die, Millicent said as she tried to stop the bleeding. Hathor writhed in pain. His howls dulled into whimpers until he finally unclenched his rigid body and his final breath rattled from his mouth. A tear dropped from Millicent's cheek. as she closed his eyes and laid his head on the deck. "Looks like it's just us now," Millicent said to Bennett, but he had already left the scene. Bennett managed to get some of the ship's steering and propulsion systems working, and Millicent found a large piece of material for a makeshift sail. Bennett attached it to the pole, and using a compass found in the storeroom, they headed west in earnest. A week later, most of the food had run out, and the water was rationed to the point of a sip every 3 hours at best, and Millicent and Bennett barely spoke more than a sentence at a time. The nights began to look more blue and purple than black, and the days more orange than they should. When Millicent finally spoke about this to Bennett, he stated that it was her mind playing tricks on her. "It's the lack of water. It does things. Makes everyone look different." Bennett was looking out to the ocean with a longing in his eyes. "How do you know that?" Millicent said as she looked over the edge of the ship at a mound of land ahead. Swaying palm trees, lush yellow sand, and what looked like some crude shelter situated just inside a friendly growth of jungle. "Madness is part of sailing. I've seen many a man fall deep into its brace, and it doesn't discriminate on rank or experience." Bennett stepped away from the edge and rested his back against the stern. Millicent took one last look at the mirage and slumped next to him. "We're not going to make it," she said, and Bennett passed her the near-empty bottle of water. He didn't answer, only shaking his head subtly. Millicent's head dropped onto Bennett's shoulder, and her eyes began to slowly close, with the cooling sensation of the wind dappling her face, as she drifted into a heavy sleep that consumed her entire body, and everything faded to black. Millicent woke up with a jolt and looked around in a daze. She was inside a neatly laid-out cabin, and the moonlight beamed into the cozy room. She checked around in confusion and realized that she was on a ship. "We must have been rescued," she said as she looked around for some clothing. She picked up a neatly folded dress. She unfolded the dress and her face was gripped in shock. "This is the same dress I..." She trailed her sentence off, then stood up and pulled the dress on. She opened the door and stepped cautiously onto the deck. The night was strange and unreal. There were no stars, just the moon shining across the sea. Millicent looked across and saw Bennett at the helm, battling the waves as he steered the ship on course. He briefly looked at her as if they'd never met or talked before, and Millicent was frozen in fear. As the rain lapped down on the deck, she looked around at Bennett, and she saw a giant of a man toiling with large ropes at the other side of the deck. "It's strange," Millicent shouted back at him, "but I have this terrible feeling we're all in danger." Millicent walked over to Bennett, who was paying less attention to her now. "If you don't change course, I believe that most of us will die tonight." Bennett laughed. Then he checked her expression, which was set as rigid as stone. Then there was a large thump as the ship knocked into a solid object. "Men, grab anything you can use as a weapon." Weapon?
Right.
What's a weapon?
Grab your weapons, everyone.
Weapon! "Men, grab anything you... For God's sake, why can't I say this?"
It's alright. You'll get it. This will be on the outtakes. 3, 2, 1.
Hathor yelled. No, I'll do that again. Right. The eye looks angrily at the sheep. At the sheep. The eye looks angry at the sheep. Hathor's... What am I doing instead? For God's sake! Right,
Sort of
mouth,
back
work for me now. Big mouth. Right. Should have done my mouth exercise before. Right. "Come now, it's just the body," Hathor said as he repositioned it. It wasn't until they were on deck that they noticed that Hathor